today. The insurer has confirmed that it has sent a letter to Moyo's attorney saying it would not seek further court intervention on the firing of the CEO.
The board was very concerned when it came across certain information that hadn't been given to it. It came across that information with approval and discovered that things had gone horribly wrong. The board met on the 1st of May, discussed the issue in great detail. Another decision was taken on that day, and that was that whereas we're a 20% shareholder in NMT, we should separate them out, and they were informed of that by letter on the 2nd of May. The board on that day put together a committee of 4 people to try and meet with Peter because there were conflicting reports of where we were. 3 of those people are in the room, Stuart van Graan, Paul Beloy, and I. We met with Peter from the 2nd and tried to establish what the basis for information is. And we couldn't reach satisfaction, and so later, and you'll find this in the court records, on the 16th of May, we gave him a letter asking for further information. We gave him a few days to respond. We looked at the response, we took it to a committee of the board, which is called the Nominations and Governance Committee. It was taken to the board eventually on the 23rd of May. Peter was invited in to explain the gaps in information, and then it triggered a series of issues, including the decision by the board to suspend him on that day.
Peter Moyo joins me in studio. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Let's give our viewers some context on this issue. After dismissal, I think you've been to court 3 times. Talk to us about why you approached the court, what you were seeking, and what happened.
Okay, thanks, Linda. It's very simple. What we're challenging in court, we actually said the termination of my contract was not in line with my contract. So the issue here was a contractual challenge, that Old Mutual did not behave according to the contract. Even if they'd behaved according to the contract, we actually said the basis, nobody, no objective person could come to the conclusion that there was a conflict of interest, because that actually was the main thing. However, in their court papers, Old Mutual was saying they actually terminated my contract on what they called a no-fault termination. So let me quickly go through what the issues behind the so-called conflict. When I joined Old Mutual, I was employed by NMT. I was the CEO of NMT. I'm a shareholder at NMT. I'm a director of NMT. And at the time, we actually agreed on protocols on how we're going to manage that. Old Mutual is a shareholder. So on July last year, NMT declared a dividend, declared 2 dividends, declared an ordinary dividend, Old Mutual got its dividend, and declared a preference dividend, which actually was not paid at the time. It was to be paid later. 2 days later, when Old Mutual asked why they were not paid that dividend, the executives of both Old Mutual and NMT spoke, and NMT said they were actually going to pay them later after some full proposal that they were putting had nothing to do with that. And when Old Mutual looked at this proposal, they said, please pay us the dividend now, and that actually was paid. So we went to court to say, I want my job back, failing which I'm going to claim damages, both contractual and delictual. But we actually asked for an interim relief so that I could go back to work immediately. The court granted us that relief. Old Mutual challenged that. Our view was it was not challengeable because it was an interim relief, and an interim relief is different to a final relief. So I could actually be back at work whilst they were appealing. Mm-hmm. And we won that. And last week, when we went back to court, the judge again affirmed that I had to go back to work, but he also allowed Old Mutual to appeal his judgment.
Yeah. Trevor Manuel is saying that they're not ignoring the court but are waiting for appeal to be seen through, that you are not an employee. So I'm trying to understand what your understanding of your role is there, because he's also saying that it's abundantly clear in terms of the Companies Act, and I'm quoting him now, in terms of who appoints a CEO, and the judge took away from that responsibility away from them. He said a single individual who happens to wear a robe cannot usurp essentially the decisions of a board.
Well, that's actually interesting. That thinking is actually very, very defective. What actually happens if the board is behaving in a different way, in the wrong way? What can employees do? Surely everybody has got a right to go to court, and I have a right to go to court. So to actually assume that you are a board of Old Mutual, you are above the laws of this country, it's actually shameful. That's actually for me, one of the saddest things about being associated with Old Mutual was when somebody makes that statement. That's not the character of Old Mutual. Well, to stand up and say, we can't be overruled by an individual, because, I mean, that's actually so disrespectful. So disrespectful. I don't believe in that. But there were also other things that came out today, and it actually talks to what one is dealing with. He was clear that there is no respect even for the smaller shareholders.
Okay, I do want to get into the many issues that Trevor Manuel spoke about, but the one is on this issue of NMT Capital and that conflict, and what he says is at the crux of the matter, saying you chaired that meeting, your first responsibility was to Old Mutual. Instead of dealing with your obligations, you distributed 105 million rand as ordinary dividends among your 4 shareholders. So he says essentially you put money in your pocket and you put the needs of Old Mutual aside, and that's the issue, and that's why they want to get rid of you.
In fact, it's actually a simple thing. It's in the court papers. That's a meeting that declared a dividend of 105. Actually, also took a decision to pay Old Mutual 37 million for their preference capital obligations. So I don't know where this rubbish is, quite frankly, coming from, because it is there in the papers. At least people should learn to read. It is there. The mere fact that the executives of NMT paid that later, it's actually something else. I don't work at NMT. In fact, the judge actually said, don't conflate Peter's issues and NMT's issues. I don't work at NMT. So the decision that I was part of actually declared that preference dividend. It is a statement of fact.
Okay. Manuel says that besides that issue, that was the initial issue that led to your dismissal.
Yeah.
Then he says, when you engage the services of Eric Mabuza and Advocate Dalim Mpofu, Senior Counsel, you raised issues that were not raised before. And he says all about his triple conflict, and he says all those issues were listed when Old Mutual was listing, and that you personally have read that and signed off on that. So you're either being dishonest then about not knowing about that triple conflict, or you're being dishonest now. What's your response to that?
Well, again, I don't even know where he's getting that. Actually, I was flying from London when we had actually almost finalized all the work around listing, when we hit with this travelers issue. And somebody, including people from Rothschild, said to me, we must get Trevor to push the South African board to accept to take an Old Mutual PLC obligation onto South Africa. And I said, that doesn't work. Trevor, I said, Trevor, you're the chairman of the South African business. You sit on the board of PLC, and you are the chairman of Rothschild. It's something I spoke to Martin Kingston of Rothschild, and the next day or two I spoke to Trevor, and that's actually when all hell broke loose. In fact, he accused me for wanting to break the board. He can't actually do that. He can't be forcing the board. I actually challenge that. It was outside of a board meeting. This is a statement of fact. In fact, if you go to the records of Old Mutual, you'll actually find that Martin Kingston went into the executive suite on that Sunday night because this thing was actually serious for them.
Okay, so just to be clear, you didn't sign off on anything acknowledging that there was that conflict and it was going to be managed?
No, sorry. Again, noting a conflict, just like, it's almost like him saying that because it was disclosed in the PLS that I was a shareholder at NMT. Why then is it an issue? Why does he think because it was in the PLS? It is the behavior afterwards that's actually quite important, because I was being told that he must actually direct that, and I refused. I challenged it.
Okay. We know that there's a legal challenge. And
sorry, the other thing that he says came into the papers. It was actually his issues about the Gupta-related fees. I took that to the board because I knew about it. And nobody seems to want to give the details, even about that. And even today, it's not even disclosed in our financial statement. I went to the board and said, we need to disclose it. I'm a chartered accountant. I know that. And people can't turn around and say the number was immaterial. That number is way bigger than what we pay some board members.
Mm-hmm. There was a discussion about that. I wish we had both of you sitting in studio so that we wouldn't have to refer constantly back to the press conference, but he has denied that he's used Old Mutual money to fund his legal.
Sorry, if you listened carefully, he never talked the details of this Gupta-linked thing.
Okay.
I took that to the board, and at least the board have actually confirmed that I took it to them. The board has confirmed that they paid those fees. What the board has actually said is that it had to do with the reputation of the company. No, this relates to the time before Trevor was actually chairman of the company. So we're talking about things beforehand. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that much better than a lot of people. So the best thing they should actually, because they keep on saying, Peter signed this thing off, Peter knows. Why don't they just say, hey, we're not going to answer this. Let Peter answer. That's actually the best thing that they can do.
Mm-hmm. We know legally that you have taken Old Mutual to court and you have won those challenges. My question is, based on the press conference from today and based on the statements of the board and the chair, there seems to be a breakdown in trust in your relationship and they don't want to work with you. How do you go back to work and how do you envision that relationship working when and if you go back to Old Mutual?
Well, you know, actually, why I'm laughing, I hope some of the statements that were made today get you to understand what I'm dealing with. When you're actually dealing with people that will make the statements, that they can't be bound by an individual who puts on a robe. Therefore, they then give this impression that whether it's only him or 15 of them, they're above the law. So you have a CEO that challenges them. Then they say there's a breakdown. And what happens if it's actually found that my challenging them was right? Why must I leave? Because that's actually the center of it. I mean, I can't actually be penalized when I'm right, should I? We've actually said to them, you have made these assertions. Let's actually test them. At least on a prima facie basis, an independent person has actually found in my favor. He's actually said what they did was unlawful, it was illegal. He's actually found that the so-called conflict, there's no evidence that Old Mutual was prejudiced. There's no evidence that NMT planned to prejudice Old Mutual. And this is an independent person. It's not me. So why must I actually be penalized? So when you have that situation, either you go back and actually say, look, we can't, we're in conflict. We have to reconcile. We have to kiss and make up. Or you actually say, how do we better go different ways? We have actually said to Old Mutual, we are open to talking. We have actually said so. And in fact, if you listen to Trevor, he was so long-winded, almost coming to the conclusion that I don't know why I need to talk.
What do you want?
Well, we've actually been clear. We've actually said, firstly, I want my job back, failing which I'm going to claim the court must actually either give me my job back or award me damages on a contractual basis or on a delictual basis. On a contractual and delictual basis. Because, I mean, they've messed up my name.
Peter Moyo, thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Embattled Old Mutual CEO joining us in studio today. Francis, it's over to you.